Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Verity Donnelly, and I am here today not replacing Diana Murdoch, but lending my voice as she lost hers due to a cold, and she apologizes, but she's here with us today, of course, anyway. With Diana and Ruta, we are looking forward to sharing with you recent work on quality assurance, monitoring, and accountability. We are also very happy to have with us today Verity Donnelly. And after working in schools, local and national government in England and Wales, Verity worked as a project manager for EASNIE for 12 years. From 2022, she is working as part-time consultant, mostly recently involved in two clusters for the thematic country cluster activities, in short TCCA. Verity will provide some reflections and future considerations on the TCCA work later on today. To give you a short overview on today's webinar, we will start with an introduction to the overall background and then move to the specific work of the QAMA country cluster. We will close then the webinar with some reflective questions. As a part of its aim to be an active agent for change, EASNIE has developed a new way of working with its member countries. The thematic country cluster activities, the TCCA, began in 2023 addressing EASNIE member countries' priorities by working in small clusters of countries. This cluster work is centered around three main priority areas, as identified by member countries. For example, monitoring policy implementation, developing strategies to support collaborative, cross-sector working, developing multi-level, multi-stakeholder frameworks, quality assurance and accountability frameworks. The work is aimed at and ensuring the effective translation of national policies for inclusive education to regional, local and school levels. This webinar will give an overview of the work of one cluster of countries as part of the overall TCCA project. This cluster focused on a whole system framework development for quality assurance, monitoring and accountability. We called the group QAMA for short. 6 countries worked collaboratively in QAMA, which stands for Quality Assurance, Monitoring and Accountability. The countries are presented here by their flags. There is Austria, Belgium, Flanders, Greece, Italy, Spain, and UK, Northern Ireland. The group looked at the internal processes and overall coherence of a whole system framework to be used for continuous improvement in inclusive education systems. We also discussed how it could be made to be adapted and used by policymakers and other stakeholders at all levels, and also by those outside education. As you can see here, we based our work on the draft framework that had been developed and presented in the TCCA literature review. You see that this involved some hands-on work in separating all the different aspects and processes and in putting them back together in a different format. A number of questions were under continuous discussion, such as, should efficacy be included? How can shared responsibility and shared accountability have more prominence? How can evidence be shown? Or should learners be placed at the center of the framework? These displays here show an early stage in the process of framework redevelopment. These two versions show some differences which we spent time discussing in more depth to try to reach a consensus on the content and placement of all aspects of the framework. There are 2 main deliverables from the work done by QAMA. Firstly, a paper providing the background and development of the framework, and secondly, the guidelines for use. And here you see a redesigned framework that begins to take shape. As you can see, all our discussions are leading towards a different conception of the framework as a set of continuous processes rooted in shared core values around equity and inclusion. We would now like to present to you the QAMA tree. It's quite a big picture you can see, and it's full and quite comprehensive. This is a full system framework for quality assurance, monitoring and accountability. This diagram presents the framework as a whole. We present this as a flexible tool for countries, sectors and stakeholders to adapt to their own needs and contexts. The QAMA tree, as its name suggests, presents a circular system rooted in a set of core values to drive equity and inclusion, for continuous improvement, to build capacity at all levels and to integrate the flow of information for improvement to and from all aspects of the system. These core values are shared by all stakeholders. Without these values of effective communication, shared vision and goals, shared responsibility, shared accountability, and cross-sector collaboration, it is unlikely that an effective system of quality assurance, monitoring and accountability will be developed or sustained. The second stage of the system is represented in the trunk of the tree. To enable growth and development in a continuous process of renewal, core values develop shared understanding between all stakeholders, leading to the development of strategy for effective implementation of decisions across the system, which is developed through and focused on stakeholders at all levels and all learners. Strategic decisions are made in the development of legislation and policy to enable capacity building or strengthening the support implementation with processes in place for monitoring and evaluation, reflection with, and feedback to stakeholders at different stages and levels to inform change and improvement. We will now move to the upper part of the tree and zoom in a bit there. So this is the upper section of the framework as the top of the tree, to show how it may enable collaboration across sectors and levels and with different sets of stakeholders. The drop-down sections are indicative only, bearing in mind that the framework can act as a guiding structure. The top of the tree presents the 4 levels of the education system: national, regional, local and community, and school levels. Where some systems do not operate at regional levels, for example, those sections will be subsumed into national or community levels. All stakeholders and all learners are placed in the center of the framework to reinforce the notion that it is people who are both the drivers and the focus of the education system. It indicates that the ongoing improvement of outcomes for all learners must be the aim of a framework for quality assurance, monitoring and accountability of an inclusive education system. This work is presented in our first deliverable seen here. This provides a sound evidence base for the work drawn from international research and high-level organizations and indicates why a unified system approach is needed. It identifies the ways multiple systems for quality assurance, monitoring and accountability coexist in parallel in education systems, which can act to hinder progress in inclusive education. This demonstrates the clear gap and need for a fully integrated and united approach. The purposes are set in the wider context of education systems and in relation to international research on the need for systematic approaches to enable the continuous improvement of inclusive education, to avoid siloed thinking, and to draw all aspects of the system together under one vision or principle. The framework recognizes the importance of cross-sectoral collaboration and is therefore widely relevant across sectors and levels outside of education and which intersect with education. Verity will now provide her reflections on different aspects of the TCCA work. Please, Verity.
Thanks, Margarita, and good morning, everybody. For my part, I'm just going to provide some reflections and future considerations on the QAMA and TCCA more broadly, and then link this to some international evidence and links across key areas of work, and finally some reflections looking to the future. So it's been interesting as I moved from the agency, just as TCCA was coming in. It's been very interesting to reflect on the TCCA methodology, and as we've heard, it's enabled a more flexible approach and a particular focus on country priorities. In particular, it's enabled joint working across countries, as we've heard, but also within the project, there's been great examples of work across different system levels and sectors from within the countries. And altogether, I think this builds on a more flexible model to adapt to different country contexts. Peer learning opportunities have always been a particular strength of the agency. And that's really been evidence here. I love the photo of the group doing the cut and paste exercise for the to create the new model. And there's been successful exchange visits where often the informal learning is as beneficial as the formal activities. And critically, the decision from the group was really to focus more on the learner at the centre and improvement at the heart. And that's really the essence of that move that you made from a theoretical model that was created in the TCCA literature review to a model in practice, and bringing in all your diverse knowledge and experiences, I think, has been a particular strength and has enabled that model to be far more practical. And finally, the methodology has helped the agency to become a more active change agent, supporting implementation, particular strength in collaboration, and the focus on learners and families. So the tree model that we've just seen really brings the model that was presented in the literature review, which was by its nature much more theoretical, really brings that to life. And that reworked example brings in all your experience, the experience of the group, and is focused on practice, which is a real strength. And again, the model has the potential to be used flexibly for working across different contexts. From the study of theory that the project originated with, sharing your practical experiences and discussions in meetings about key issues and approaches, I think the group has developed a model that can be used to look holistically in the big picture, but also at particular areas within it. So it really covers the big picture as well as the detail. In that model, as Margarita presented, the cross-sector collaboration is one of the roots, along with the shared responsibility, accountability, shared vision and goals, and effective communication. These are all important areas and have been identified often in projects and in clusters now across the work of the agency repeatedly over recent years, and with that emphasis on collaboration and cooperation. We've often mentioned in this work that cross-sector collaboration increases the complexity of work, particularly in monitoring and evaluation, as it requires that shared vision from different professional perspectives, shared language, etc. And I think here this model can potentially help identify issues and possible solutions moving forward, particularly in that complex situation. I think the model also has potential to increase coherence and consistency between policy, monitoring and accountability. This has been identified as a gap, as few, if any, countries have a really coherent quality assurance monitoring and evaluation system for accountability and ongoing sustained improvement. And this model tries to simplify a very complex system to support reflection on the structures and processes, on relationships, connections. And I think it will be a really useful sort of springboard for further development to address challenges such as monitoring of complex situations I've just mentioned, but also other issues such as monitoring the effectiveness as we move towards more prevention models, where success may need to be viewed in a different way. Looking across all the TCCA work, the emphasis reflects a real priority relating to that gap I mentioned about monitoring and evaluation. And countries have recognised the need to develop this quality assurance monitoring and evaluation frameworks to support continuous improvement, to develop a particular focus on implementation of policy and take account of this increasing cross-sector working. All the clusters within the TCCA highlighted the need for shared vision and agreement on underpinning values and principles, and this is very much in line with the work of the agency over the years, and in particular the key principles that the agency published in 2021. All the groups have also emphasised the key role of learners and families, really placing them at the centre and making sure that their views are taken into account in monitoring and evaluation activities. I think further common ground can be seen in the inclusion of wider perspectives and broader success measures, for example, social emotional development, the need to reflect on different views of progress and achievement that goes beyond a narrow academic attainment. For example, how do we measure progress in learners with very complex needs? And then finally, as a range of diverse needs in school increases, the importance of cross-sector collaboration is recognised. And that is the focus of two clusters, collaborative action for inclusive education, known as CAFE, and advancing collaboration in education, ACE, who also consider monitoring and evaluation as part of this work. And this example is from the Collaborative Action for Inclusive Education. As the tree model developed by QAMA, this tries to capture the complexity, put it into a simpler form, and make links between key areas of work. At the bottom, you'll see the conditions are set out and the drivers that support the work. And it identifies cross-cutting dimensions of leadership, capacity building and monitoring. So you can see these themes are really common across a lot of the TCCA clusters. Again, it's grounded in theory. It started with the work of the literature review, but now has a more practical focus. And the final outputs from CAFE will include country examples, suggested actions and key questions to consider, supported by some academic references. And that work will be available soon on the agency website. So to just broaden out a little bit now to consider some international evidence, we need to be aware of international commitments such as Sustainable Development Goal 4, and certainly in the climate of increasing uncertainty, we need to be preparing our education systems for global challenges. The quality assurance monitoring and evaluation process is clearly important here to know what works and to inform plans for the future. This future depends on the ability of people to continuously learn, to relearn, to adapt and innovate to address current challenges. And UNESCO in the Fortaleza Declaration in Brazil talks about the transformative power of education for peaceful, equitable and sustainable futures. And OECD also looks at trends for shaping education and suggests that with the technical developments and less time may be spent in direct human contact, education can maybe help maintain a sense of community and foster social, emotional learning and well-being. This relates to the point made earlier about measuring effectiveness of provision in ways beyond academic outcomes, as well as holding a range of services to account. UNESCO looks at future directions regarding learner rights and notes these critical enablers, starting with evidence-based, inclusive and accountable systems that guarantee access, equity and quality for all learners. In practice, this entails robust data and evidence mechanisms to identify gaps, inform policies and monitor progress, particularly through disaggregated data that captures intersecting inequalities. Participatory and inclusive governance, actively engaging civil society, educators, learners and communities is also critical to design policies that are relevant, responsive and equitable, and of course informed by effective monitoring quality assurance mechanisms. UNESCO recognises that cross-sectoral collaboration strengthens the capacity of education systems to be resilient to crises, with interventions across social, health, culture, sports and technology all integrated together. And finally, sustained political leadership and public advocacy are necessary to drive implementation, mobilise resources and reinforce education as a fundamental human right across all levels of decision making. Looking to the future and considering the key role played by developing quality assurance monitoring and evaluation frameworks, we need to consider those critical enablers as we move forward, recognising links between inclusive practice and other key areas such as sustainable development, response to crisis, safe use of technology and artificial intelligence, and also to address growing disparities. In a paper, Reimagining Our Futures, UNESCO sees education as a shared social commitment and suggests we need to reimagine why, how, what, where and when we learn in the context of the current challenges. Given the extent of societal change, really education and the way it's delivered hasn't changed for many years. We need a clear view of its purpose in a rapidly changing world. How to organise lifelong learning, teaching, learning for citizenship, personal and social fulfilment, supporting intercultural dialogue across communities and using formal and informal settings in communities to increase social inclusion, access to services and relevant employment, which is rapidly changing. All of these raise challenging questions about monitoring, evaluation and effective use of information, as we need to rethink the traditional view of school and consider things like community hubs, hybrid learning, and this increased flexibility of sites, environments, curriculum, timing, groupings can all support the inclusion of all learners. We need to look through a broader lens to extend our focus beyond the current core business of schools to address greater diversity and increasing need. For example, the increases in ADHD, mental health issues, and the growing importance of all agencies working together to address these needs. Above all, we need strong and inspirational leadership to bring about sustainable change, retaining a fundamental focus on rights to education and within education to provide high quality, inclusive education for all learners. Okay, that's all from me. I'm now going to hand back to Ruta.
And I will continue presenting the second deliverable that was produced in the QAMA cluster. And in this slide, you can see the guidelines for use and the purposes of the document. And taken on their own, the background paper and the framework remain at a theoretical level. For this reason, a clear set of guidelines are needed to enable policymakers at all levels to consider how the framework might be of use and enable change to be implemented in their own systems. The guidelines present 5 main uses and propose some further uses. Also, in the guidelines, QAMA countries have presented examples of practice and reflections of their own framework from their own context. This slide presents the 5 uses of the framework. And the first use of the framework is to map the whole system of quality assurance and accountability. Countries can use the framework as a template for a system mapping tool for examining their own quality assurance systems in terms of overall structure, processes, and aspects included. This would enable areas of strengths to be identified, as well as gaps or areas where the flow of information may be broken across the sectors, levels, or between stakeholders. The second use is to focus on more detailed mapping of aspects of the whole system. Topics of the framework provide opportunities for more detailed mapping of particular aspects of the system, such as accountability or data collection, or a deep dive into some of the inherent processes, such as formative feedback and reflection or capacity building. The third use is to establish the extent and effectiveness of collaboration across different sectors, levels, organizations, or stakeholders within the education system, to show the extent of effective collaboration or information sharing with and between sectors, schools, and stakeholders within the education system. This can highlight aspects of the quality assurance and accountability system that may act as barriers to equity or which support continuous improvement. For example, the fourth use is to establish the extent and effectiveness of collaboration with sectors outside education. Used as a whole or in sections, the framework can show the extent of effective collaboration, dialogue, and information sharing with and between system levels, sectors, and stakeholders beyond education, but which impact education. This might include collaboration with health, social justice, and welfare, for example, to ensure that the system is integrated and equitable and considers a wide range of factors. The flow of information from these sectors beyond education can be incorporated into the framework. To support ongoing monitoring and evaluation across and within system is the fifth use proposed. The framework can support monitoring and evaluation within countries when they establish ongoing procedures to bring different sectors and processes together over a period of time for continuous improvement. In addition to the main uses, we also propose some additional uses, such as identification of barriers to sharing of information in relation to equity, diversity, intersectionality, and the impact on policy implementation for some group, in relation to equity to access, or data collection, analysis, and use at school level, and the extent of or barriers to the impact on stakeholders and policymakers at regional or national levels. Other procedures, other proposed uses can be, for example, capacity building and the effectiveness of opportunities from interlevel learning and collaboration, enabling sharing the impact of formal CPD system, or flow of information and findings from data collection in relation to well-being, equity, opportunity, and outcomes across different groups to influence policy for change, improvement, and access for marginalized and less visible groups. In this slide, we provide some information in relation to QAMA cluster work on EASNIE website, where you can find the background paper, which contains the summary papers on 3 topics: development of the framework, school improvement, and accountability. You can also find in the website the guidelines for use, which were presented right now. And before we conclude this webinar, we would like to leave you with the key questions for your consideration in your own country work. And these questions are the following. Do all stakeholders and actors in my country agree with the essential elements of multi-stakeholder quality assurance and accountability framework? Which of these elements are currently in place in my country, and at which levels and sectors? To what extent are they effective, in need of development, or overlooked? In the next slide, we also leave you a set of questions, and we hope you will be using in analyzing your country systems or separate elements of these systems. And with presenting you the contact information of the agency, we would like to thank you for your participation in this event, in this webinar. We would like to thank also the 6 QAMA cluster countries who worked with us in this process and in developing the 2 deliverables. We would like to sincerely thank Verity Donnelly, our expert who joined us today, and also Margarita Bilgeri, who joined this webinar at the very last minute to help us to present the provided materials. Thank you so much, and looking forward to another possibilities to meet and discuss topics of your interest.